know that the World Affairs Council focuses on world affairs, international relations, and I think they billed me as talking about drone warfare. But I really want to talk to you, I want to talk a little more broadly about drones because I think that they may be the most important new military technology maybe since the atomic bomb, at least since the nuclear-tipped intercontinental missile. And they have a lot of implications. And we don't know all of them yet because this is a very new technology. I think that we are right now in the middle of a drone revolution. And I want to talk about that, maybe give you kind of a cram course on that for 20 minutes, and then just talk about it with you, see what questions you have, and see who's still awake. And I think a lot of people are just now waking up to the fact that we are in the middle of a drone revolution. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it's a revolution. Unmanned aircraft are ushering in the most important new age in aviation since the jet engine. They're also changing the world. And only 10 years ago, no one saw this coming. The drone revolution's roots go back a lot further than 10 years, of course. As a matter of fact, the U.S. military first tried to build a drone that would carry a weapon in World War I. Technology was nowhere near close enough for that to be done. But the modern drone revolution, which has its roots in the late 70s and early 80s, and actually in Israel, where the need was greatest for aircraft that could do the things drones do, really stems from the maturation of other technologies. Satellite communications, GPS, miniaturization of computers, and digital photography. Without those four things, we wouldn't be having this modern drone revolution. But all those technologies were necessary but not sufficient conditions for there to be a drone revolution. The condition that really was the tipping point was 9/11. Around 9/11, the U.S. Air Force put missiles on a drone called the Predator and began flying it on missions for the CIA, whose first purpose was to kill Osama bin Laden, but whose general purpose was to kill any Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders they could locate. They actually used it on the first night of the Afghan war. They had Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, in their sights, but because of a legal dispute at the high command, no one gave the order to fire until it was too late to get Mullah Omar. They ended up killing a couple of his bodyguards. And that was the first time that anyone ever killed someone that I know of on the other side of the globe using a remote control aircraft. The people who did the killing were about 8 miles from here when they did it. When the U.S. Air Force realized that this weapon worked, President Bush also gave it a great impetus. It was about 6 weeks after that incident when he said in a speech at the Citadel, "It's clear that the military doesn't have enough unmanned aircraft." And the very next day, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force ordered every Predator that the Air Force owned to be armed with missiles. And that's how the revolution really began. And by the way, I'm writing a book about that, which I hope to have out in another year's time or so.
So did people realize the significance of that at the time, like reporters and other people who talked about it?
No. As a matter of fact, it's not very widely known that the first Predator firing of a missile was actually on the first night of the Afghan War. A lot of people think that the first time was months later.
Yeah.
10 years ago, more than a year after that, a drone was still just a bee with no stinger and a lousy work ethic. But now drone, everyone uses the term drone to refer to unmanned aircraft. Now we all know what they are, or at least we think we do. Today's drones vary in size from those you can hold in your hand and have to be able to see as they fly for the few minutes their batteries will last, to airliner-sized planes that can stay aloft for more than a day, fly thousands of miles, and whose pilots can only see them on a computer screen and control them via satellite, and as I just mentioned, often from the other side of the globe. I'm sure you all know that the Predators and another drone called the Reaper that the U.S. Air Force flies in combat in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world are actually controlled from an Air Force base just outside Las Vegas.
Where are the drones actually? I mean, where do they launch from?
They launch from countries in the Middle East. They're from secret bases, mostly. They have been flying a lot of them from Afghanistan.
You can't launch them from here. I mean,
No, they can't. There is a drone called the Global Hawk that can fly 10,000 miles. But the Predator that we talk about a lot can stay in the air about somewhere between 25 and 40 hours, depending on its speed and the wind conditions. But it flies about as fast as you drive your car on the interstate, judging by looking at you.
Yeah, I'm pretty fast.
No, 70. So, but let me just spew a few more facts at you, and then let's talk about some of those things. As I said, 10 years ago, nobody knew from drones. The military only had a handful. When the war in Afghanistan began, I think the Air Force had fewer than 24 Predators. Today, our armed forces have nearly 8,000 drones. And the militaries of 50 or so other countries are buying or developing drones themselves. In the United States alone, more than 50 companies, universities, and arms of the government are now developing or producing more than 155 different types of drones. 10 years ago, before there were any armed drones, most generals and admirals and even the CIA had no real interest in unmanned aircraft. Today, the Air Force and Army rely on the first modern armed drone, the Predator, as a regular component of their combat operations, and armed drones have proven to be the CIA's chief weapon in the U.S. war with Al-Qaeda. The Air Force and Navy are also right now developing more capable drones called unmanned combat aerial systems that are essentially fighter planes without pilots. And I'm not sure I believe it, but an Air Force report 3 years ago predicted that by the time the Air Force is 100 years old in 2047, they will have drones equipped with artificial intelligence that will pick and attack targets on their own without any human intervention. That is a scary thought. 10 years ago, the Air Force had to beg most pilots to do a tour flying the Predator. Sometimes they were sent there because their careers were essentially over. In 2010, for the first time in its history, the Air Force trained more drone operators than it trained manned aircraft pilots. And the Air Force Academy, the same year, began awarding cadets who learned to fly drones a new special type of wings, I should say. Up until now, as you can see from what we've just been talking about, drones have largely been a military technology. But that's about to change in a big way. And that's another reason I say we're in the midst of a drone revolution. Up until now, the Federal Aviation Administration, whose first concern is air safety, has refused to let anyone other than the military, the Department of Homeland Security, NASA, and select government and academic researchers fly drones in the National Airspace System, as our civilian airspace is known. Since 2006, when the FAA first adopted rules for drones, the agency has issued only about 300 permits to fly them, all to government and academic applicants. And the FAA has banned drones from being used for business purposes. If you had a little drone and wanted to fly it up over a park somewhere around here and take a picture, let's say, of the Washington Monument, and then sell it as a postcard, you would be violating federal law. Late last year, though, with the drone industry pushing hard for it, Congress passed a law that requires the FAA to integrate what it calls unmanned aircraft systems into the National Airspace System by September 30th, 2015. Now, translated, that means Congress has ordered the FAA to figure out how to let drones routinely share U.S. skies with the 18,000 airline aircraft and 230,000 smaller planes and helicopters that already use those skies for about 100,000 flights a day. Yes, ma'am?
With what intent? Did I stop you?
You're very good. I was just getting ready to tell you that. A lot of people are interested in seeing the FAA open the skies to drones as fast as possible because there are countless ways in which civilian drones could be used to save time, money, and lives. Now, we're not talking about armed drones. Law enforcement agencies, fire departments, and other first responders want to use drones to deter or track criminals, detect and help fight fires, find missing children, locate victims of floods, tornadoes, and other natural disasters, and help rescue or save people in distress. The news media would love to be able to fly drones to get aerial video of all those kinds of events. Oil and natural gas companies could use drones to monitor thousands of miles of pipelines that cross the United States so as to detect and repair leaks more quickly and generally to ensure their security. Farmers could use unmanned aircraft to monitor and dust their crops. Commercial photography, aerial mapping, advertising, the ways that civilians may be able to use drones to make life easier and better is only limited by your imagination. If all these things come to pass, there could be a huge economic benefit. The drone industry could become a multi-billion-dollar segment of our economy, producing thousands of jobs of all kinds. Jobs maybe some of your students would like to have. Major defense and aerospace companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and lots of smaller companies have already created special divisions to develop and sell drones. Other companies are gearing up to provide drone services. Schools such as North Dakota State University and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University have created majors in building and designing and flying unmanned aircraft. And imagine how many more companies will be making drones or parts for them or providing services for them, and how many more schools will be offering courses and majors to train people to work for those companies if the civilian promise of the drone revolution is fulfilled. But as the saying goes, not so fast, my friend. Because there are a number of speed bumps on the way to the civilian side of the drone revolution. And if some people get their way, there may be roadblocks. Because like most technology, drones can be used for bad purposes as well as good. Drones raise many more issues than we'll have time to discuss today, and some of them are very difficult. Now, I know that at least one of our people here is very interested in the question, for example, whether it's constitutional or even good for the President of the United States to be able to put a U.S. citizen on a target list and have him killed by remote control based on secret evidence and secret standards. Two other issues that I think are going to have the most immediate impact on the course of the drone revolution here in the United States are safety and privacy. A lot of people in the aviation business, particularly air traffic controllers, are worried about how the FAA is going to ensure that when drones start flying in our national airspace, they aren't going to endanger other aircraft. The cornerstone, or is anybody here a pilot by any chance? The cornerstone of in-flight safety for manned aircraft is Federal Aviation Regulation 91.113, which states that, quote, whenever weather conditions permit, regardless of whether an operation is conducted under instrument flight rules or visual flight rules, vigilance shall be maintained by each person operating an aircraft so as to see and avoid other aircraft. This is known as the see and avoid standard. Drone pilots, though, often can't even see their own aircraft, much less others. And pilots of other aircraft often have a hard time seeing drones, which are pretty small for the most part. As a matter of fact, just last year in Afghanistan, a C-130 transport plane, a U.S. military transport plane, nearly crashed when it ran into a U.S. military drone. The good news for those worried air traffic controllers is that the FAA has already said drone operators are going to have to meet the see and avoid standard by using what's called sense and avoid technology. That means the FAA is going to require drones to be equipped with technology that will let their operators know when other aircraft are nearby, and ideally let other aircraft know where the drone is as well. Both civilian and military drone operators hope to satisfy the see and avoid standard with systems that combine radar, cameras, and other sensors with software that can tell a ground-based drone pilot or an automated drone's flight control system how to change course to avoid other aircraft. Industry and the military, which, by the way, desperately wants to be able to fly drones in the national airspace because they're going to need somewhere to train after the war in Afghanistan is over. Industry and the military are working hard on this sense and avoid problem. And the new law requires the FAA to select 6 ranges around the country where drone makers, operators, and researchers can fly in civilian airspace to test these sense and avoid systems. The only catch is that experts tell me that sense and avoid technology that can meet the see and avoid standard is at least a decade away. And remember, Congress told the FAA to open the national airspace to drones by September 30th, 2015, 3 years from now. Fortunately, that same law says the FAA has to do that safely. And believe me, safely is a word the FAA takes very seriously and very literally. Now, sense and avoid is only one safety issue. The military doesn't like to talk about it, but the drones they've been flying so far crash at a much higher rate than any manned aircraft do. More than 90 of the 268 Predators the Air Force eventually bought, 1/3, were lost in crashes. Another issue is what's called lost link. The fact that the radio signals used to control drones sometimes get interrupted, breaking the operator's connection to the aircraft. When that happens, most drones are supposed to be programmed to climb higher to make it easier for that link to be restored. And if it isn't, to then go home and land. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And sometimes drones just run out of fuel and crash. I think, by the way, I have no evidence of it, I can't prove it, but I think that that's what happened to this drone that showed up in Iran. Now, these safety issues don't mean that the civilian drone revolution is going to be stopped in its tracks, because, as I said at the beginning, drones come in all shapes and sizes. Hobbyists have been safely flying model aircraft of 55 pounds or less at altitudes under 400 feet using what's called line-of-sight controls for decades. And as the law requires, the FAA is already moving to relax its former ban on civil and commercial uses of these little drones, which are known as small UAS, UAS meaning unmanned aircraft system. On May 15th, the FAA issued new small UAS rules that will let government public safety operators use drones of 25 pounds or less for official purposes under flight restrictions similar to the ones that govern hobbyists. The FAA is also going to require these law enforcement agencies or other public safety operators to get what's called a certificate of authorization from the FAA before they fly. So the FAA is still being cautious, and it's going to require that your local department approve that the small UAS the sheriff wants to use to find that escaped prisoner is airworthy, isn't going to just fall on someone's house, and the Deputy Fife or whoever else is going to operate it is proficient in flying it, and isn't going to just crash it into something. So it may not be that long now before we start seeing small drones buzzing around at low altitude when there's police activity going on in our towns and cities. Which brings us to another major issue, privacy. One new and strange aspect of the drone revolution is that it's bringing the ACLU together with conservatives like Charles Krauthammer and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, the son of Ron Paul. They and many other people are afraid that when the police and government start using drones in the United States, the remaining shreds of privacy we have in the national security state we've become since 9/11 will be gone. After all, if the government can give us traffic tickets based on photos as we drive by their cameras, what will they be able to charge us with when their cameras can fly over our houses and look into our backyards, or maybe even peek through our windows? It's not a frivolous question. Last December, the ACLU issued a report arguing that we need new privacy laws for the coming age of domestic drones. Quote, "Our privacy laws are not strong enough to ensure that the new technology will be used responsibly and consistently with democratic values," the ACLU said. "All the pieces appear to be lining up for the eventual introduction of routine aerial surveillance in American life, a development that would profoundly change the character of public life in the United States." Now that ACLU position is what the conservative columnist Charles Krauthammer was referring to last month. Maybe some of you saw him on Fox TV when he told Bret Baier that drones are instruments of war, and then said, "I'm going to go hard left on you here. I'm going to go ACLU. I don't want regulations. I don't want restrictions. I want a ban on this." Now, Krauthammer isn't really going ACLU when he calls for a ban. That's not what the ACLU is saying. He's being hysterical, in my view, and quite frankly displaying his ignorance of drone technology. Drones aren't just instruments of war any more than guns are. Or to paraphrase the famous bumper sticker, drones don't kill people, people kill people. And maybe you could say also, drones don't spy on people, people spy on people. And I think that we can protect ourselves against the misuse of drones, just as we have laws to protect ourselves against the misuse of guns, automobiles, and any other kind of technology. But the basic point is correct. We do need new laws, probably. And just as we needed new laws when cars came on the scene and we had to change our traffic laws. But like it or not, the drone revolution, Mr. Krauthammer, is here. It's too late to yell, "Get a horse." It's not too late, though, to invent the drone equivalent of stoplights and speed limits. And speaking of limits, I think I've probably reached the limit of what I ought to spew at you. And let's just have a conversation, if you'd like. Yes, sir.
Have there been any instances where terrorist groups or groups that do not like us have actually tried to intercept drones and use them against us?
I'm sure there have been attempts. I'm unaware of any successful attempt. The U.S. military did a couple of years ago find a laptop computer that I think it was a Taliban insurgent had, on which he had intercepted, downloaded, and recorded predator video. You know, one of the main uses of these things is to look at what's happening on the ground more than to fire missiles. That's actually somewhat rare compared to, I don't know how many missile shots per hour they fly. But anyway, they had been able to do that. I think that the military since then has taken some steps to better encrypt the signal. That had to do with the fact that they were using an antenna that was sort of like your TV station uses. And it was actually broadcasting the video in all directions, and if you knew where to point your antenna to look for it, you could pick it up. But this is a new technology, and all these things were, you can't think of every eventuality to start with. There have been also, I think, one or two instances in the United States where people may have been arrested or accused of plotting to put explosives on what's essentially a hobby model airplane and try to crash it into something. But as far as I know, that's never been actually done. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sort of new to this topic of discussion, so
We all are.
forgive my
We all are.
ignorance. But, when we talk about technology, one of the arguments that one can have is that just because we have this technology doesn't mean that we need to use it. So my question is rather basic, but can you please elaborate on, besides military operations, war operations, areas of conflict, why might the average farmer want to use a drone, or the average news station want to use a drone when I just don't see why we would need that?
Well, in those instances, they would be replacing in a much less expensive and much more agile aircraft things that are already being done by helicopters and biplanes.
Okay, so it's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
Okay.
In some ways, it's safer.
Okay.
There's no pilot on board who can get hurt. That's logically that's been one of the attractions for the military, but in fact, I don't think that's played any role in military thinking about drones. But that would be one reason that people would want to use it. It's. We're talking in some instances about. I just was in New York recently, working on an article about drones for Popular Mechanics. And I went out with a young man who has a business, an aerial photography business, and right now he has to rent piloted aircraft to go take aerial photographs when he gets a client. But he's also a hobbyist, and he's been working for years with these little helicopters and things called quadcopters and hexacopters. If you go to this store called Brookstone, you can see them on sale. You can buy them now for a couple of $100. You can buy a little aircraft
They fit in the palm of your hand.
that basically fits in the palm of your hand, or at least on the top of this podium, and it has a camera on it, and you can fly it yourself. You can't do it and charge anybody for what you do with it legally, but you can do it as a hobby as long as you do it in a safe place. Anyway, he thinks that when the FAA finally gets around to issuing regulations that will let him use his little drones instead of renting airplanes and helicopters, that his profits, the amount of business he can do and the profits he will make will just skyrocket. No pun intended. Yes, ma'am.
How badly compromised were we when the drone crashed or came down in the Middle East last year?
Yeah. no one outside the intelligence community and the upper reaches of the military and the government really knows the answer to that. I suspect not much. I'm not even sure that the object that the Iranians put on display was really an intact drone. This aircraft is called an RQ-170 Sentinel, and it's a stealth drone that Lockheed Martin built, and that we think was what they were using to try to track Osama bin Laden before the raid that killed him in Abbottabad. As I said, I think that probably what happened was they were flying. I think that what happened was, I have no evidence, I couldn't prove it. I think what happened was that the CIA were flying this drone over Iran, trying to gather intelligence about their nuclear program, and that it lost link or ran out of gas and crashed. It may have made just a hard landing, given the fact that Iran has so many deserts and so on. I don't know exactly where they found it or exactly what condition it was in. It may have been pretty beaten up. There are all sorts of reports that maybe they would call the Chinese. I think the Iranians even announced that they were going to ask the Chinese to help them reverse engineer this thing and figure out how it works and everything. But I don't think it's really that easy. But as I say, that's just somewhat informed speculation. Yes, ma'am.
This is not exactly on the drone, but it's on the stealth helicopter that crashed, which is also was new technology when we went after Osama bin Laden, and that was as important almost of getting that helicopter back as us getting bin Laden out. Were we successful, or why was that such a big deal? I mean, it's sort of like someone capturing the drone in trying to figure out what the makeups of that.
Well, it's probably less important in a way. It's certainly less important for propaganda purposes. The helicopter is something that, I write about helicopters and rotorcraft regularly, and I think I know a fair amount about them, and it's something I had never been aware of before. So again, it was a secret program that built by Sikorsky, which is the oldest helicopter maker in America, and it basically, as I understand, the technology had to do with trying to muffle the sound of the rotor blades, which are helicopters are notoriously loud and easy to spot on radar because of their rotors, and so this technology was meant to change the aerodynamics around the rotors to reduce the sound. But I don't think it's a major. We are not under attack by anybody using helicopters.
No, I can't.
And I don't think there's anything for us to worry about too much there. Maybe Sikorsky was not happy because someone might be able to copy their work.
Well, I was going to ask, you compared it at the beginning to the atomic bomb, and of course, in less than a decade, other people had the atomic bomb. How long do you think it would be before enemies, whether state actors or non-state actors, will have these same armed drones? And brings Ronald Reagan to mind with Star Wars. Something to defend against them.
Well, it's fairly easy technology to build these days, now that everybody knows how to do it, essentially. But it's also, I think if you're worried about it, are other countries going to use it against us?
Well, yeah.
I think the answer is generally no.
What if Al-Qaeda decides they want to drone the White House?
Well, we have extensive air defenses that probably would detect anything they could put together, unless it's one of these hobby things, and the hobby things don't carry that much.
Right.
So I think if it were that great a threat, maybe there would have been an incident of some sort by now. But I don't think it's a threat. In fact, one of the major drawbacks of the fact that our military has 8,000 drones is that they don't think any of them would likely be able to penetrate another nation's air defenses if they were fighting a nation that had air defenses. You know, they've been used in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the United States and its allies totally controlled the air.
And they're high-tech weapon against the low-tech enemy.
Exactly.
But if you open up the domestic airspace, though, would each drone have to have a certain? How do you distinguish between? How would you be able to distinguish between a friendly drone that's being used for aerial photography and an enemy drone that might be going somewhere?
Right. Well, I guess in the final analysis, maybe if someone misused the system, you wouldn't be able to tell if someone went through the normal processes and started flying a drone. They could theoretically crash it into something or use it for nefarious purposes.
I mean, how do you tell the difference between someone taking a picture of the Washington Monument and have it circle and people say, "Oh, look, you're taking pictures," and then all of a sudden, go into it?
Yeah. It's possible. It's possible. But I don't think it's a great danger. I mean, these things aren't, drones of the size that would actually do any damage are not that cheap. I mean, a Predator costs about $8 million, I think. And that's not counting the ground control station you need to operate it. It's not, as a matter of fact, the irony is that while you think, oh, well, it's an unpiloted or unmanned aircraft, and so obviously you're saving money on personnel. No, actually, it requires many more people to operate one of these than it does to operate a manned aircraft, because you have to have what's called a launch and recovery element of people who get it prepared for takeoff. And actually, in the Predator's case, the people who are there, you were asking where they fly from, the people who are there actually take off and land the aircraft, and when it gets about 100 miles away from its base, that's when the people over here take control of it via satellite. So it's not that easy to buy and fly your own, and I think that of all the processes you'd have to go through to make it look like you were legitimate, you'd get caught if you weren't. So I just don't think that's a huge danger.
How do commercial pilots feel about them?
Well, I think they're wary of them, more as a hazard in the air than anything else. But they also recognize that the technology's there and it's coming, and so they just want to make sure that the FAA does its job carefully and cautiously and writes regulations and enforces regulations that make these aircraft as safe as possible. Look, manned aircraft have accidents all the time. Last month, 2 small private planes collided right out here in Virginia.
Yeah.
And one of the pilots worked for the National Transportation Safety Board, and the other one was with the FAA, I believe. So accidents happen. I mean, I'm not a representative of the drone industry, so don't get me wrong, but I do see the advantages of them in many ways, and I see the parallels with other technologies, and I think that the head of the Drone Industries Trade Association does make a good argument when he points out that we suffer thousands of deaths every year on our highways from automobiles. And in a lot of ways, automobiles are dangerous technology, but we get so much good from them and so many advantages from them that we swallow that risk. Yes, ma'am.
So did I understand you correctly that there are no military drones in U.S. airspace?
Oh no, there are. but they don't fly routinely outside of military restricted areas. The FAA, for the military to fly drones in airspace that's used by civilian aircraft, they have to get permission from the FAA. That takes about a year to get the FAA to approve what's called a certificate of authorization. And when they get those certificates of authorization, it will allow them to fly drones at limited times, only in daylight, and always with another plane flying nearby called a chase plane that has a pilot on board who can see other aircraft that could be endangered by the drone and radio to air traffic control or to those other airplanes to make sure they don't have accidents. So, in the military, these are restrictions that are very onerous for the military because they want to do things like, for instance, the U.S. Marine Corps flies a small little drone called the Shadow. It's about 7 feet long, so roughly the size of this table, the fuselage, right? Carries a camera. The troops in combat use it to see where the enemy is. Those are based, they have one squadron of those that are based at Cherry Point, North Carolina, where the Marines have a big air station. They need to train with the infantry troops who are based at Camp Lejeune. And they need to train in exercise areas that are outside of Camp Lejeune. And they need to fly from Cherry Point through civilian airspace, busy civilian airspace, over to the Camp Lejeune area. So they have to get a certificate of authorization from the FAA, and they have to have ground observers and a chase plane watching as these drones make that flight. So it's a very elaborate procedure they have to go through just to send a drone over here to train with Company C for a few hours. So they would like to get the FAA to approve some kind of sense and avoid technology they could put on those drones or use from the ground so that the FAA would have confidence that if that drone came within some distance that could theoretically lead to a conflict with another aircraft, the drone itself and its operator would recognize that and change its course.
So the likelihood of the drone in the United States right now being used by the military for the purposes of taking out someone would not be very likely right now?
I hope not.
We had a speaker yesterday.
No.
I didn't apply that.
I'm sorry?
We had a speaker yesterday who had applied that.
Oh, really? Who was that?
Barbara Chansky.
I don't know her, but no, that no such thing is going on to my knowledge, and I seriously doubt any more than the military is going out and killing people with M16 rifles.
Although it is a CIA weapon.
Right, that's true, but it's not very well known. But the Air Force actually flies it for the CIA. So in effect, it's a military weapon. But if you don't trust the CIA, and there are lots of reasons not to trust them, I know, then I wouldn't be able to dissuade you of the idea that they're going to be misused here in the United States, but I don't believe that's going to happen.
But even, I guess, sort of in terms of reports that we see regarding the impact on civilian populations, I understand that they're supposed to be able to more specifically target whatever it is that they're targeting, but then you hear all these reports of collateral damage, villages.
Right.
With how much accuracy are they able to target? And, what do these other populations that we're supposed to be trying to support perhaps feel
Right.
about this? I mean, I just think there's huge ramifications in terms of how we're using them in other countries.
Right. Well, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Pakistan blasted the use of drones?
The Pakistani government has been two-faced about it. The Pakistani government has cooperated with the United States and allowed the United States and winked at the United States using drones in the Northwest Frontier Province. They were very happy when the United States killed a Pakistani Taliban named, help me, I had his name a second ago, it'll come to me. It was written about in the New Yorker, you may have seen it. Whittle, I think was his name. Anyway, but the Pakistani population, men in the street, women in the street, doesn't like them, and who can blame them? I mean, I wouldn't like it if a foreign country were flying over my neighborhood, killing people near me, even if they were people I didn't like, and particularly if they sometimes killed innocent people. So it's totally understandable that the Pakistani people have been unhappy about this, and it's debatable whether the removal of, in some cases, very key Al-Qaeda figures has been worth the backlash that it's caused. Even the critics of the Obama administration have complained that the administration has adopted a policy of killing instead of trying to capture these people, which is a short-sighted way to go about fighting this war, because if you capture someone and you're able to interrogate them, maybe you learn things that allow you to prevent future terrorist acts. But the missiles that are used on the Predator and on the Reaper, which is the other, the larger version of the Predator that also carries bombs, are actually probably the most accurate weapon in the U.S. arsenal. They are guided by a laser beam. The missile homes in on the reflected light of the laser beam, and in the statistics I've seen are that this missile can be relied upon to strike its target within about 3 meters, which is a lot more accurate than other weapons. I think that the reports of civilian casualties are exaggerated from the other side and inaccurately minimized by our side. I think if you hear administration officials saying that there aren't any civilian casualties, they don't know what they're talking about. There certainly have been.
And then can I just ask another thing? Just in terms of how forthcoming there is going to be in terms of information regarding how these are being used. We just got another report a week ago that they've been being used in the Horn of Africa, which we weren't told about until a week ago, but it's been happening for a while.
Right.
I guess that's sort of my other concern is where is the oversight in terms of having an open line of communication about how they're actually being used?
Yeah. Well, if they're used in counter-terrorist or military operations, I think that, it's pretty well established that the military and the intelligence agencies don't have to announce what they're going to do, because after all, they can't do it if they announce it. I do think it's a problem, and I don't think it's right that the government, both under President Bush and under President Obama, has refused to discuss in a really open way how the decisions are made about who is killed and what standards are met. And I think that that's a valid issue, and one that people need to keep talking about and thinking about. I have made my career as a journalist. I've been in Washington 34 years. And I think that this administration has been worse on withholding information and prosecuting people who leak information than any administration in my recollection. and I think even going back to the Nixon administration. And that's very disappointing, because when President Obama took office, he said that this was going to be, he called for more transparency in government. And somehow the message didn't get through to the Pentagon and the Justice Department and the CIA.
I just had a question regarding the implication that the current foreign policy that we have with drones have on the laws of war. How do you think that's changing? I mean, there's an increased robotization and the use of drones for target killings and just monitoring, which it can be good use. But it seems that we're sort of abusing that, and abusing that sort of puts it in challenge vis-a-vis the laws of war. How do you think that is changing, or do you think it's changing, or what's your take on that?
Well, I don't want to claim to be an expert on the laws of war. The experts are debating whether the United States has the right to conduct the kind of drone operations it has under international law, because what they have said is that the people that they're killing are enemy combatants, and under international law they have a right to kill enemy combatants. Under laws Congress has passed, they have the right to kill people who are taking part in or plotting terrorist actions against the United States. But at the same time, as you well know, being a bit of an expert on the topic yourself, the UN Special Rapporteur for summary execution said 3 years ago now that the United States was violating international law, and I don't think that accusation has been adequately addressed or even debated by the U.S. government, other than to say no, we're not. As I said, the standards that they use to decide who is going to be on the... We're only now getting some information about it because there have been leaks to the Washington Post about how people end up on this list and what standards are applied before the president says to the CIA, yes, you can kill that person. And even actually, a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, the former acting general counsel of the CIA made the mistake of talking to a journalist about this. And I happen to know both the people involved, and he thought that he was speaking off the record, which is a... No. And he has been investigated. I don't know where the investigation stands, but he was very quickly put under investigation by the Justice Department on a potential charge of revealing classified information. I don't understand why our government has seen fit to keep secret from us what procedures it goes through when it decides that it's okay to kill someone, including U.S. citizens. And I don't think it's right, but I don't have any answer for you as to whether some international, whether someday any U.S. officials are going to be standing before court at The Hague. I kind of doubt that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Tom had a quick question going back to the drone in Iran. I mean, every watcher of Mission Impossible knows that they're supposed to self-destruct. Why did that not happen, or is that ridiculous? And secondly, could you really reverse engineer even if you have a complete drone? I mean, isn't most of the work in the software back in wherever it's being launched from? I mean, if I picked up a little model airplane that someone flew around,
right.
Have a remote.
Well, I got a hunch that neither you nor I knows enough about engineering. It's just a hunch to know the real answer to that question. But I'm with you. I don't think so. I think that the aircraft was probably one of the biggest problems with any aircraft, manned or unmanned, is weight. And every possible step is taken to reduce the weight
So the
that it's
self-destruct
carrying.
mechanism.
And a self-destruct mechanism, which they don't expect to need to use, would surely add a great deal of weight, even if it were only half a pound of plastic explosives or whatever. So I don't think they would carry something like that.
So that's not right.
I don't know, but I don't think so. I don't think so.